And then I will give the word to Arun Dohle from Against Child Trafficking.
Yeah, hello. I hope everybody can hear me well. I'm currently in Raigarh in Chhattisgarh in India. We had luck today. We solved one more search case. So that is what we are doing. Yeah, I'm supposed to speak about the Flemish as a Dutch report. And I've been thinking long whether I go into details into these reports, or whether I go and put these reports into the context. Because I think it's pretty clear that for the whole audience here, that we all know about the fraud in intercountry adoption, and that there have been a lot of wrongdoings, and many of us have personally faced this way or the other. So the reports actually are good in the sense that they partially reconfirm that there was child trafficking, as I would say that. But as the conference is called Flip the Script, I will try to take you from the 1950s till today a little bit. It's a little bit a roller coaster in trying to explain what I think, or what we think is a script. And there's also a script behind these reports. And there's also a script and probably a pretty predictable outcome for the investigation in Sweden, for the possible investigation in Denmark, and maybe in other Nordic countries. So this is why I choose this. One second, that is in the way. So my script. Interestingly, when I started thinking about the word script, it's really, really funny, because basically our lives have been completely changed through adoption, and that is really like a script. And that's why I suddenly came up with the idea of, that is my script, actually. So I was indeed born in India in 1973 to an unmarried mother. We know now also from Ireland and from the Netherlands and from all the countries what that actually means, that the mothers had no choice other than parting with their children. That is everywhere in the world. I was nicely adopted by a very well-to-do middle class, upper middle class, intellectual, academic German family. I had a pretty good childhood, actually, pretty happy, apart from somewhere this adoption mess. I was a very happy adoptee. You wouldn't believe that I am such a happy adoptee, but I am actually. And there's this adoption thing. So first I tried in 1993 to search, and the orphanage stalled me. They said, time will heal all wounds, and we don't have any records. I was young, I didn't know what to do. So I traveled through India a little bit and all that. And so that it's also better understandable from where I'm coming from, is actually I was pro-adoption. So I actually wanted possibly to adopt myself until around like 2003, 2004. Could have happened to me that I would have become an adoptive parent. After some normal career hiccups, partially also caused by adoption, but I actually became a successful financial consultant and really started to search in 1999. So the first thing I did was turning to Yahoo groups for help, and also trying to get in touch with other people who have successfully searched. And where my idea or my image of adoption started to flip around was when I met a German adoptive mother who had adopted a child from Missionaries of Charity. And the child told her actually that she's not an orphan, that her parents were still alive, or her mother is still alive, and that the mother promised to pick her up in the orphanage. From the orphanage, that was the Missionaries of Charity case. And the adoptive mother actually did everything possible to find the mother and actually returned the child later. And then I met Tobias, and Tobias actually had a group called Interadopt Research, together with Holly McGuinness, I believe. And on this group, suddenly some Indian woman, an Indian activist, appeared around 2002, 2003. And they were fighting in India against child trafficking, buying and selling of children from, the Lambada tribe. It's kind of it's kind of a tribe. And they were fighting this, and were fighting intercountry adoptions. And Geeta Ramaswamy was the woman who actually wanted to, build the bridge and explain the people in the West what's happening on the ground and happening in the field, and also wanted to talk to adoptive parents. And she opened actually the world for me in India. She got me the right contacts. And so basically I could actually fight my own case in 2003, which I did in the end of 2003. I lost at the High Court, and subsequently I went to Supreme Court, but I had to travel so many times to India for my case that actually, of course, I lost my job as financial consultant. That was not possible anymore. So I was actually traveling to India and digging into these adoption scandals, which were more current scandals, not like from the 80s, but current. And I came across the cases of the kidnapped children. I mean, parents whose children were kidnapped and sent to the US, to Australia, and to the Netherlands. And also, I got details of the trafficking from Ethiopia already in 2006. So it was pretty clear there's a huge mess. And then when it really flipped a little bit more flipped, was when we started digging into Preet Mandir. Preet Mandir is an orphanage which has been accused of trafficking of children and has done a lot of wrong things. It's very complicated, but there was a documentary made by CNN IBN, and actually I gave this information to the German authorities, and they closed down ICO, the German agency. And that I also met Anjali, who's sitting there on the sofa. So together with Anjali, we started fighting Lily Preet Mandir. And then there was a documentary made. It's called A Baby Business. And it was screened in Denmark in 2007. At the same time, in the Netherlands in 2007, the Dutch media actually took up these kidnapping cases. And these were, at the time, current cases, And still in 2007, it was not completely flipped, because I was still saying, when I met Rudy Post in the summer of 2007 for the first time, I was still saying, I am not against adoption, but I am not against adoption. And that also has to do with the fact that I was part of the reformers at the time. Some people who are longer in this field may remember Etika, which was set up by Trish Matthew, and was an organization advocating for ethical adoptions, peer parents for ethical adoption reform. So I was part of these groups, also of the internal groups. And of course, I was rather close to David Smolin. And they have the reformer agenda. And that kept my brain. I was not able to think outside the box. I have to say that, really. And that only could happen after I met Rudy Post, who's our founder. And she happened to have published the book Romania for Export only in 2007, which came out around the same time when the media reported about the scandals. And this was a difficult moment for me. So what I'm trying to do now, if you don't understand what I'm trying to explain, please ask me. Maybe not, you can ask today, but you can ask tomorrow, you can ask anytime, almost, because I'm almost online, and I will try to explain better if I'm not good enough. Because honestly, it took me like 3 months to understand child rights. And that is because I was brainwashed by the reformers and by the adoption crowd. So I understand why. But it took me really 3 months. Together with Rudy Post, we actually founded ACT and did a lot of work. But the history of ACT, for the organization I'm now running, is actually Romania. It is the accession process of Romania to the European Union. And here are a few facts. The UN Convention on the Right of the Child is actually primary European law. The Hague Adoption Convention, which is now so much and so often referred to as the solution for the problem of trafficking, is not EU law. And this fight, this conflict between the United States and Europe, between the adoption lobby and the European Commission, between the Hague Adoption Convention and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. This fight, we are still in this fight. And that was during the accession process of Romania, the absolute hot potato. Because also Romania was the first country in the world which implemented the Hague Adoption Convention, basically on advice of international social service and defense for children. India, the country where I've done also a lot of work, where we have done a lot of work, one could even say is Hague compliant since 1984, because all these documents and conferences and preparations which went into the Hague Adoption Convention went already to the Supreme Court of India in 1984. And 1984, the Supreme Court of India normalized and regulated intercountry adoption. Also with, I come later to this, subsidiarity principle and so on. Definitely this system which the Supreme Court of India set up in 1984 was definitely implemented in 1995, though India, of course, much later, I think in 2003, only India ratified the Hague Adoption Convention. So what is the key to flip the script? It is this Romania story. It is, and that's, I'll explain a little bit more, just keep it here as a keyword, is an independent expert panel set up by the EU to advise Romania on the new adoption laws, on the new child rights policies and laws. I'll come back to that later. Let's go back to the 50s. we all remember, no? Angelina Jolie, what is this, Madonna, and whoever, celebrities, even Mia Farrow, all these celebrities who actually collected children or wanted to adopt. And in fact, Tobias can probably correct me if I'm totally wrong. This is not really academic historic research, what I'm explaining here, but I'm just trying to summarize it a little bit. We had let's say the Holt crowd. We had the Pearl Buck and the evangelists and the the adoptive parents who just wanted a child from Korea or other countries. And we had always international social service, who were the good people. One shouldn't forget, though, that international social service and this WAIF, together with Jane Russell, started the whole intercountry adoption mess, with actually adoptions from Greece and then from Europe. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to really go into the fine details of that, but it's pretty interesting to see that in the 1950s, no, I can't read my own thing here. In the 1950s, the World Adoption International Fund was formed by Jane Russell, seen here in 1962. Russell, who adopted all three of her children after a botched abortion, left her unable to have her own, started WAIF as International Adoption and Fundraising Branch of International Social Service USA in 1953 to help orphans across the globe find homes. WAIF placed hundreds of thousands of children with US families over the next couple of decades. In later years, WAIF would concentrate on finding homes for hard-to-place orphans. We know this special needs children. We have that still. We hear that all the time. That only now there are only special needs children. Ill racial minorities and older children who were at this time considered to be unadoptable. She also advocated for single adults to be able to adopt. Another taboo years back. International social service. This is essentially what we are dealing with today. International social service reiterates its position that in general, children in need of adoptive homes, if possible, should be placed in such homes in their own country. if this is not possible, there should be accorded proper safeguards in immigration and placement with adoptive families in other countries. So this is what we call the subsidiarity principle. It's the same since the 50s, same as The Hague. I explain it more later. So we had always this fight, the good, international social service, the social workers, and the one who follows the right and correct procedures. And I take this as example because everybody knows them. Pearl, Buck, Holt, these are the bad ones. They need to be policed. And remember also that ISS helped Holt actually to adopt their children. So they were first in Korea, just if I get that right. So we always had this fight of the criticasters, the critical good ones, so-called international social workers, versus the more rogue agencies who want quick adoptions and want the children quickly matched with the parents. So we always had to fight the regulated market versus the full market. And we can find it also back in the new frontier, which is surrogacy or artificial reproduction technologies. I will only touch this today. So we also can categorize it in normalizing something and legalizing instead of having it illegal or illicit practices. So we have it legal adoptions are fine. Legally erasing and changing the identity of a child is fine. But if you do it illicitly, if a parent just registers him or herself on the birth certificate, which at the end has the same effect, that is not fine. Let's go into the history of regulations. And let me just remind you that I'm not taking you without reason there, because I wanted to put the Dutch and the Flemish report into the context of this. Again, I'm not a historian. And again, there's not enough time to really dive deeply into this. But, since the beginning, there were adoption scandals, there were controversies. Since the beginning of intercountry adoption, and there were also discussions about the rights of children. So one milestone of regulation or finding some guidelines were, for example, the guidelines of Leysin. There was a conference in Leysin. If somebody wants to have that, I have that now finally, since a while, a copy of that. Then there was a UN declaration on for adoption and foster care, and the Council of Europe and The Hague Permanent Bureau and ISS started working on a European Adoption Convention, which actually happened, I think was passed in 1967, but it was always irrelevant. Then even The Hague regulated, I think in 1965, there was the first Hague Convention on Adoption. And, over 10 years, on UN level, children's rights were discussed. And in 1989, United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child was adopted by the UN General Assembly. That is the most important human rights treaty till date, which has been ratified by all the countries, just not the United States of America. The problem with the UN Convention on the Right of the Child, which I'll explain a little bit more in detail, is that it limits intercountry adoption, and it obviously gives children's rights. So actually, countries shouldn't be able to export children anymore. Because the adoption lobby, I call them, let's say adoption lobby or adoption mob or adoption mafia or whatever it is, they figured that. So they went to the Dutch government actually, and they got some funding, Defense for Children International, to start working on the Hague Adoption Convention. In fact, Nigel Cantwell. And Nigel Cantwell was earlier also the coordinator or chair of the NGO group, non-governmental organizations group, for the UN Convention on the Right of the Child. So we have the same guy twice involved. By the way, very nice guy to talk to, but professionally, we obviously butting heads. So he started working on the Hague Adoption Convention together with the Permanent Bureau of The Hague. And as I will show also, there were two officials from the Permanent Bureau of The Hague who were on the board or council of international social service. So what we have here is actually, you know, like if you imagine the tobacco industry making their own international law on healthy smoking. That is what the Hague Convention actually is. It was made by the industry, though by the good part of the industry. In 2004, and that is due to Romania's accession to the European Union, an independent panel set up by the European Commission to advise Romania on the new laws that flipped the script. And since 2004, if you look, the numbers also going down like this. And that was done by our founder, Ruli Post, who did do that in her capacity as EU civil servant, backed up by the complete hierarchy of the European Commission, backed up by the European Parliament, and backed up by the European Council. She was just a small working bee. But we all know what happened. The independent panel is forgotten. Ruli Post is meanwhile fired. She became a whistleblower. That's another big story. Sadly, we can't go much into it. But the adoption lobby wanted to counter that, and also specifically counter that Romania closed down intercountry adoptions in 2004. So they started working on something called the UN guidelines. The UN guidelines on alternative care for children. They were first called guidelines of children without parental care or something. So in 2004, all this work started. And if you read the guidelines, you will find the word permanency. So get that word permanency in your head. If that is the thing, that simple, stupid word, permanency. Summarized in 2009, the guidelines were welcomed by the UN General Assembly, but not adopted. These guidelines are today promoted as if they were binding and the international standard. They are not. Keep that in mind. It comes back and back, these guidelines. Here, this is what I was just saying. This is from the Van Loon report. Actually, I knew that Van Loon was on the board of ISS, but a few weeks ago only, Ruli actually found this footnote in the Van Loon report. The author of this report is a member of the International Council of International Social Service, as was the former Secretary General of the Hague Conference on Private International Law, Mr. M.H. van Hoogstraten. We need to understand that this is a conflict of interest, as international social service is one of the biggest adoption service providers by numbers in the world. And they made the Hague Adoption Convention. As I said, Romania's accession process broke their script because the Hague Convention was broken down by the European Commission. The European Commission has only one choice. They have to look, what is the laws? There's something called Copenhagen criteria. If a country, for the countries who want to join the EU, you can imagine this like a club. If you want to join a club, you have to adhere to the club rules. And old Europe, like Sweden or the Nordic countries or Germany, stopped exporting children. We don't do this anymore. France, Germany, Belgium, Sweden, we didn't export children anymore. We did that before. So as part of the Copenhagen criteria was implementation of the UN Convention on the Right of the Child. And The Hague was not EU law. So the European Commission, which is actually there to monitor this and to ensure this, had a huge amount of power, because they could tell to Romania, if you don't do that, you're not becoming part of the EU. The European Parliament backed the European Commission up in the efforts of reforming Romania's child protection in line with the UN Convention on the Right of the Child, and in broad lines, as we do it did it, I would say, in the old European member state. The European Council backed the European Commission also up. Yeah, the terminus is EU acquis, so the UN Convention on the Right of the Child is EU acquis. And with the power of the European Commission and the money the European Commission could give 60 million euros for the reform of the local child protection, there was a huge amount of reform done in Romania. So the big orphanages were broken down, made into family type homes, foster care was established. And of course, in 2001, there was a moratorium. And in 2004, a stop of intercountry adoption. What is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child? It's a broad treaty which lays down and lays out children's rights, very detailed. I cannot go into this right now, but we have to please keep in mind that all the articles are interdependent. So what I'm picking now is only 2 articles of the UN Convention, those who directly deal with adoption. A child temporarily or permanently deprived of his or her family environment, or in whose best interest cannot be allowed to remain in that environment, shall be entitled to special protection and assistance provided by the state. And that is something we Europeans understand, but when you try to speak to US Americans, they don't understand that the state has to provide something. They don't even have, many of the Americans don't even have a health insurance. So that is something we really understand what human rights are and child rights are. So the state has to provide for these children. State parties shall, in accordance with the national laws, ensure alternative care for such a child. Such care could include, inter alia, foster placement, kafala of Islamic law, adoption, or, if necessary, placement in suitable institutions for the care of children. When considering solutions, due regard shall be paid to the desirability of continuity in a child's upbringing and to the child's ethnic, religious, cultural, and linguistic background. Now, one has to understand that this fact that adoption is here in Article 23 is often misunderstood as if adoption is a child protection measure. I will explain that. Children have rights versus the state, not versus any private person. So we have rights holders as the children, and we have the duty bearer. And the duty bearer is the state, not any adoptive parent or any other person who runs around on the road. Adoption, historically, adoptions were mostly to find a heir, or mostly even adult adoptions. So even in Germany until 1976, adoptions were contractual, though really my adoption was a contract. So yeah, only after 1976 this changed. So these adoptions are civil law, private law. They create a relationship between persons. So adoption, per definition, per legal strict definition, cannot be a child protection measure, ever. It always comes down to a civil order between individuals. That is misunderstood by many people. Just imagine every child would have a right to be adopted. How would the state, how can the state even ensure that every child would be adopted? So if you think that through to the end, you see that adoption cannot be a child protection measure, but the state can care indeed for all children in foster care, residential care, institutional care, family type homes, or other care forms. The subsidiarity principle, that is the next question, is of utmost importance. And the UNCRC, rightly interpreted and rightly implemented, prefers every form of local care over intercountry adoption. This comes from Article 21b. Recognize that intercountry adoption may be considered as an alternative means of childcare if the child cannot be placed in a foster or an adoptive family, or cannot in any suitable manner be cared for the child in the child's country of origin. And that article cannot be used like, okay, the child will be better off in Germany from India or Ethiopia. Yeah. So, but it has to be seen from a policy level. So really only if there is no care of children in India or Ethiopia, in India, or in any other country, only then intercountry adoption policies may be permissible. But, even if we have a situation like Haiti in an earthquake, we say, no, don't take the children now out. Let's let the situation help locally. Don't do adoptions. So adoptions is almost impossible. Then, of course, as the UNCRC gives children much more rights, I mean, a broad range of rights, assistance to families is almost unlimited. I mean, in Sweden or Germany, you get housing, you get unemployment money, health care, you get assistance when you need it with the education, and of course, even if the children are in care, all these other rights of the children have to be fulfilled. So we cannot have these orphanages where orphans rocking, behind like looking in a jail or something. No, this has to be quality care. That is clear. So the Hague Adoption Convention is different, and that is where the conflict is. The Hague Adoption Convention puts the focus on permanency, and they say, like, okay, we should try to preserve the family, but this is usually limited in time and efforts, and then it results, like in the US system, in termination of parental rights. By the way, Denmark has taken this over. So when the child is now a paper or parental rights are terminated or whatever, then the child should be first tried to place the child in domestic adoptions. And if that's not working, in intercountry adoptions. The focus is on permanency and residential care, institutional care, even family type homes, even SOS children's villages, and foster care are no longer suitable manner of care. And that was also stated very clearly. I give the source. Actually, later I made a document with links to what I'm saying. The independent panel summarized really held that adoption, and especially intercountry adoption, is not a child protection measure, and that residential care and foster care actually come before intercountry adoptions. The guidelines, that is another presentation. I will just summarize it very quickly, because we will be confronted in the next years with that. And they put the focus on permanency. The other word is deinstitutionalization, the DI campaign. They want to close down all so-called orphanages. Why? Because then there will be children also for adoption. And the organizations are Lumos, Open Homes, Mestral, Better Care Network. I mean, almost all child rights organizations are promoting these guidelines, which there are many good parts if you take adoption out. UNICEF, of course, promotes them. And guess what? They were developed by International Social Service and, ironically, SOS Children's Villages. But yeah, they shot themselves in the own foot, because they have to put children up for adoption from their own village families. And keep in mind, these guidelines are nothing. They're just paper. As much as the lobby wants to make us believe this is a binding standard, it's just rubbish, bullshit. They were only welcome. You have 3 terms on UN level. One is adopted. A resolution was adopted, yes. But in the resolution, the guidelines were only welcome and not adopted. Then there's a second type. Also after adoption of something in the UN General Assembly comes the next term, welcomed, and the lowest is taking note of. So you have only these 3 terms. The guidelines are only welcome. But even Sweden implements them now, locally, domestically, Denmark too. Wait. Anyway, over the years, we did a lot of exposures. I gave just a link to our websites and to our YouTube channel, also with Denmark and Netherlands and India. I'll cut that short. But something happened in 2016. We didn't really know, but there's a Council for Criminal Law and Youth Welfare in the Netherlands called RSJ. And that council was tasked by the government, it's actually a governmental body, to assess the intercountry adoption system and actually give advice to the Dutch government. We didn't really know about this process even. Additionally, we brought out a documentary called The Traffickers, which were detailing the trafficking from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So, and of course, Amy, who's been the film A Girl in Return. Amy was in Ethiopia, so 2016 was a crazy year. But in 2016, this RSJ came out with their report, and they based their findings 70% on our research. You can see that in the footnotes, actually, not in the text. And the RSJ held that policies, child rights and adoption policies, need to be looked at from a macro perspective, and held very clearly that inter-country adoptions, which we have been saying all the years, undermines the local child protection system. And the RSJ advised the Dutch government to stop inter-country adoptions. I actually have to admit, I see this only now after I thought about the word script. And in hindsight, I didn't see that before. Because what now happened in 2017, and that's why I put all this so long story. Now I'm coming actually to the report. So in 2016, 2017, Chile, other adoptees, Bangladesh, Colombia, started digging out during their own searches the old scandals, which were all hushed up. And news were, for example, made a documentary about Bangladesh. There was one about Colombia, then later Chile. And the Sri Lanka scandals were taken up by Dutch television and then taken over by Swiss television and the Swiss adoptees. The Belgian Guatemala adoptees started figuring out that they were trafficked or that were gross irregularities, or what you would say. Criminal investigations were started regarding Congo and regarding Guatemala and Belgium, actually. At the end, the Swiss government also made a report. I didn't go into that today, but the government actually issued regrets. So the regrets. And also some Dutch adoptees actually started court cases. Now, I really, really admire the fighting spirit of the Dutch adoptees who take up court cases. Let's see how this goes, but this is a really, really hard battle against the state and against those agencies. But let me also say, these old adoptions are very easy to be categorized as so-called illegal and illicit adoptions, because sometimes they were really Wild West and baby farms and things like that, and documents fabricated. Today's adoptions, so-called legal, you don't need to fabricate records anymore, but that doesn't make these adoptions even more legitimate. So that is we really need to keep in mind. In 2018, in the Netherlands, United Adoptees International, which was then more loose, but closely working together union, working together with Planet Angel, Mein Roots, and Schabler, and ACT, and also Fighting Lot, which is other, which is part of the process, in my opinion. We made freedom of information requests, and of course, the media reported about the scandals, and that, at the end, with the questions from the parliamentarians and the letters, triggered the ministry to set up the Joustra committee. We actually wanted a parliamentary enquete, because if there's a parliamentary enquete, people have to talk under oath, and not, it's a much broader thing than the Joustra committee. But we were countered by the Ministry of Justice, and they set up the Joustra committee. We were not happy. I have to say that the Joustra committee only researched adoptions until 1998, and not after the Hague Adoption Convention was implemented. They didn't do India. They didn't want our documents, though they met Rudy twice. They met me once, but they were not interested in knowing anything. And that's where I started feeling that something is odd. And then after the summer, they suddenly said, if they get information, they will look into it. So I sent them in September, I think. I sent them tons of information last year, but of course, this was nothing used, was predictable. But the conclusion of the Joustra committee, that is damn good, surprisingly, even though I also have to criticize the body of research, specifically in the period after 96, is very weak. But ironically, which may be a strategy, they come out with the right conclusion: suspension of inter-country adoption. The current system of inter-country adoption with private elements cannot be maintained. The committee has serious doubts as to whether it is possible to design a realistic public law system in which the observed failures do not recur. In other words, there's only stop. That's what ACT always has been saying, stop it. The Congo scandal with criminal investigations, the Guatemala adoptees, and all this triggered, of course, also in Flanders. This is just one part of Belgium. I grew up in Belgium, but I still don't understand Belgium, so that's even more complicated than the European Union. I really don't understand it, the country. But okay, so it's difficult to understand. But Flanders is just one part of Belgium. And the adoptees actually really got a Flemish expert panel established. And that was interestingly triggered, or one of the triggers in the media was A Girl in Return, after which, Amy's story, after which much more Ethiopian adoptees came forward with very similar stories. And of course, Amy, now it's of course a few years ago, no, but you know, Mercy Mercy, Marshall's case and all that is all from 2012, 2007, 2009, things like that. So at that time, rather recent. And anyway, even before that, I'm not so closely able to follow everything in Belgium because I'm also pretty much excluded from the community there. So I don't really know when it started that the agencies got subsidies. But in Belgium, in Flanders, all the agencies get massive subsidies. There's more $1 million of euros per year spent on subsidies to the agencies. Yeah, in Denmark, you know, in Denmark, we have to see that after Mercy Mercy, that had a real big impact, and also Adoptionspolitics Forum and we and everybody who worked on it, you know, led to the fact that the two agencies in Denmark merged. Yeah, but we still find this ISS in Denmark. So ISS, I think in 2014 advised Danish authorities that adoptions from Ethiopia, you know, can continue. ISS IRC in Geneva was that. And also in the recent, I think, I'm totally lost in time, but I think in the recent review of the Danish adoption system, also ISS gave an advice. And of course, in the meantime, you know, DIA is only surviving, Danish International Adoption, only surviving due to state subsidies. So it's almost, you know, like taxpayers paying for that. And now the Chile scandal came. And of course, that got a lot of media attention and a lot of attention from politicians, apparently. But if I get it right, we don't have a comprehensive investigation, and then was that didn't play much role of that in that, other than, you know, the documentary, the DN series, the Chile scandal, all the adoptees, and, you know, finally results in the investigation now recently announced, which I would be curious, and that's actually why I'm doing all these excursions, because I want specifically the Nordic adoptees to understand the mess and the Hague and in what trap we're going. And I'm very suspicious of a family law professor now heading the investigation, because I think this goes all at the end in continuing the system, better regulation, more money for the system, and private international family law. Who are our enemies? The enemies are Euroadopt, which we all know, that's the association of the agencies. It is in the Nordic countries, the Nordic Adoption Council. Yeah. And all of them have the same policies as Hague. Even if you look at HOLD website, Hague policies, Hague subsidiarity. We have a new enemy, a new kid in town. It's a child identity protection organization, which was set up by the former team of International Social Service and Motu Bobo Kikyo, who is an adoption lobbyist, who has been lobbying in 2007 very clearly for reopening Romania, and has been lobbying for a European adoption policy so that the children from poorer European countries can circulate to Sweden and so on. And of course, international social service is our enemy because they're also the ones who provide for searches. They also advise the governments on policies, and they are funded by the central authorities under the Hague Adoption Convention. So this is a very corrupt, let me call it corrupt, because I think it's almost criminal, nexus. Then Defense for Children is also not our friend as adoptees or activists, because then Defense for Children still does not say clearly stop intercountry adoption. They also promote Hague, and they're the ones who actually invented the whole system or were part of it. Of course, the enemy is also the Hague Convention and the Permanent Bureau. We should not underestimate their connections and lobbying capacities. Then, of course, the central authorities and UNICEF. The question is, are we really fighting in the right ring? Because I understand all these very enthusiastic and very rightfully angry adoptees. We are fighting with our local governments for recognition.
It's 10 minutes left now.
Yeah, I will manage. I'm checking. Thank you. So the governments of the receiving countries are actually complicit. So to fight them is very difficult. They will do anything to deny any responsibility. And the central authorities, they actually need to facilitate adoption. So that's their job. And we need to really understand that legal adoptions even are still trafficking because they're done in violation of children's rights, even if they are conducted, following all the procedures under the Hague. I consider them still child trafficking. The children from Montenegro went to Sweden for intercountry adoption is child trafficking. That children from Serbia today are going to Sweden, mediated by Adoption Center, is child trafficking. And the change of identity is the same, whether you put the child just on the birth certificate or you put the money. Fighting national governments is almost like windmills. And all these reforms, all these reports, so the Dutch report leads to more money to the system. It's like in Denmark, we will probably get, I heard now through the grapevine, the Dutch government will continue adoptions. But then they need to fund the agencies. And due to COVID, they started to fund all the agencies already. So the agencies in the Netherlands get public money. For what? The Dutch government did not stop. They just stopped the intake of new cases. We were all fooled. And I'm also saying, I may not be liked for this, that adoptees' so-called lived experience and the stories are used by the adoption lobby for reform, by organizations like CHIP, because they are saying, okay, the adoptee problem is only that we don't know our original identity, that we don't have access to our original identity. Oh, that's an argument to regulate surrogacy and egg donation and sperm donation and adoption so that, we can always have access to our original identity. But our identities are much more than just a piece of paper. So all we do, unfortunately, ends in better trafficking of children. The Alstra report came with 3 recommendations. Recognize that the government has failed to address adoption abuses and the current system cannot be maintained, and provide an independent national expertise center on which knowledge in the field of identity, questions, root searches, and aftercare is bundled so that the adoptees are facilitated in accessing their files and search for the birth parents, finding suitable psychosocial help and legal support. The Dutch government actually put 36 million euros on the table for that. That's quite impressive. It's not really compensation, but it's something to start. My take is, 36 million euros for 40,000 adoptees cannot be enough. Our identities were erased and changed, and we need compensation. I'm not arguing for compensation because I don't know for how much money we need to ask. But if you see now in Ireland, there were like 800 million pounds being put on the table, so then we start talking. No? We need to also make the differentiation between post-adoption services who are there to assist adoptees and adopted children to integrate better, assimilate better in the adoptive environment, or redress schemes who actually assist the adoptees to reestablish their original identity as far as possible. and really help reconnecting. So post-adoption services is, for example, the pilot project of MFF. I mean, they just send, if you are search as an Indian adoptee, they just send that connect you with the central authority. I mean, what a mess. We need, as organizations, and here I'm speaking for myself, of course, in my organization, and also, but also for others, we need, if we have to assist adoptees with their searches like we're doing now here, we need money for that. We cannot do that with that. We need funding. And I think there are independent organizations needed to help building the bridge to the countries of origin. I also think that local DNA databases should be set up, and these somehow has to work together with US databases where there are lots of privacy issues. And yeah, I mean, it's difficult for European government to fund searches based on US data banks. I mean, we have to discuss it another time, but I just wanted to touch it. So now what we see with the Expertise Centrum, there was a whole process of designing the Expertise Centrum. And one was a meeting 2 days ago, was the last meeting. And the project leader announced that there are now 2 options after adoptees had meetings and meetings and meetings. And we are fighting with the government to keep the FIOM and International Social Service out since years. Also regarding the domestic adoptions, the FIOM ISS was involved in the investigation, but now that has also all been scrapped. So the government, the Ministry of Justice should know, don't do it with FIOM or the ISS. We were told that the option 1 is build the Expertise Centrum with 36 million euros around the FIOM, the ones who set the whole system up. Because the FIOM also set up an ISS, passed the law and got the law passed in 1956, which separated all the Dutch mothers with their children. So the domestic system is also there because of ISS. Or the second option would be a new organization, but I'm also predicting that will be also based on the ISS network and will also be based on the Hague system. And that is the reason why I made this presentation, because of course we have that same thing in Flanders, and yeah, there is no funding for searches. The domestic mothers have been fighting like mad for a centrum to assist the victims. So the center is there. It's called Origin Center or Afdemic Centrum. They're setting up a local. They're setting up a local DNA database. Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, there is no redress. There's no thing, and I think at the end, searches Intercountry Adoption will also be done by the ISS network.
Arun,
The Flemish report.
Arun, maybe we
I'm
should.
done.
Yeah, I think maybe we should just allow for like a little bit of questioning, unless you find that your ending is heavily important for your speak.
No, let me just quick end it in 1 minute, okay? The Belgian government actually decided to continue despite the report. And I'm saying, if we want to flip the script, we have to really uphold stop intercountry adoption, and we should go to the European Parliament. We should go to the European arena. That is, I think, that's what I wanted to end with. And we should be very careful, because the European Union or the European Commission has become part of the adoption lobby. So, but that is where the problem is. And thank you. Here are the links. And let's just flip the script, abolish intercountry adoption. Let's fight for redress, and let's say no to reform.